This is a Heart and Hand production.
Hello and welcome back to Heart and Hand. This is the Scout Report with me, Adam Thornton. Joining me today, I'm delighted to say, is Nima Tavalley Roodsari. Nima, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's good to be with you.
Yeah, we were just talking off air. The Cyriel Dessers signing, which we're going to be discussing today, has been a bit of a saga, but so has trying to arrange this podcast. I think we're now on our third attempt, but we've finally got there. It's a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. And I mean, the first time I was sick as a dog, I could barely talk. I would high fever. I was dying essentially. And the second time was the technical issue did not work. So third time's a charm. But it's very good to be with you and your listeners or viewers, I should say.
Yeah. Do you know what? I think it's actually the fourth time, because remember we tried to do it a few weeks before. And
it
felt like Dessers wasn't going to sign. He was going to go to Torino.
Yeah, the deal was going back and forth. Yeah, right. You're right.
We're now on the fourth time. But anyway, it's a pleasure to have you. Nima, just to kick off, do you want to give us a little bit of background on, I guess, your history in football, what you do now in terms of covering Serie A?
Well, I started a football website in 2012 called sempreinter.com, which with the express goal of becoming the biggest news site in the world in English about Inter Milan, which we quickly reached. And we've still been running that for 12 years. And since 2012. So that's 11 years. Yeah, in February 2012, set that up. And that's, I've been doing that for 11 and a half years. I've done exclusives and interviews for goal.com, for Gianluca Di Marzio, for Football Italia in the past. And now I'm just doing that and the Italian Football Podcast, where we cover the league as a whole, but also do exclusive interviews with former and current players, presidents, coaches, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, we've got a big Italian football following on the podcast, so I'm sure many listeners will be well versed in Italian football podcast. So yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. Okay, so tonight we're going to have a little chat about Cyriel Dessers and also Sam Lammers. We're in a bit of a unique situation where we had a Dutch expert on who was able to talk about their time in the Eredivisie, and then obviously we've got yourself who can tell us about maybe some of their more recent performances. So I want to talk about Cyriel Dessers first, Nima, but before I do, both players have had a little bit of a similar time in Serie A, I would say. They've both maybe not necessarily struggled, but they've both been playing at teams that are at the bottom of the league. Just for context, how difficult is that for teams that are at the bottom of Serie A just now in terms of being a striker?
Well, not just any teams at the bottom. Cremonese was very difficult. I mean, Cremonese had really no business coming to the Serie A, both in terms of, if you look at the wage structure, how big they are, it was a really, really big surprise that they came up and they surprised everyone as well. I mean, I had them dead last at the bottom of the table, but they actually kept that dream alive until I think 5 or 6 games before the end, which is really, really interesting. And they did so playing some really interesting football. They played a modern football, a high intensity, high press football, both under Alvini, the coach, who was then sacked, and then Ballardini, who came in and gave them their first win. I mean, a lot of the games that Cremonese lost, they probably didn't deserve to lose. They were really, really good. They really took it to every team, top teams especially. Inter struggled with them home and away. Milan for sure. So no, they were good. They were really, really well coached, very well organized. Obviously, defensively, they were lacking, even though they had a very good goalkeeper in Carnesecchi. But they really impressed from an attacking point of view. And I think Dessers was one of those who I think impressed. I mean, he scored 7 goals for them, which is quite a lot. I would say for a team that plays as a lone striker in a team at the very bottom of the Serie A table.
I think that's one of the things actually that fans have been skeptical about, was he has only scored 7 goals, but I guess the context of that, as we said, and also number of minutes played as well. I don't think he didn't play an awful lot at the start of the season, so he's maybe only played 20-25 games. So it is actually not terrible in terms.
Well,
of
he had 27 starts and he scored, or 27 appearances, I should say, not starts. 27 appearances and he scored 7 goals. Both in the Coppa Italia as well, where they actually reached the semi-final, which was a huge upset. They got rid of Napoli and Roma on the way, which was, they were very lucky against Napoli, but they probably should have been knocked out there. But they went through on penalties, and then they saw off Roma as well, a Roma who went to the final of the Europa League. So no, they surprised most people in Serie A. 7 goals in the Serie A playing for Cremonese is a very good turnout. Given how the style of football they play, which is a very modern game, and also it's a very young team, Cremonese as well.
So in terms of that style of play that you mentioned there, what type of setup did Cremonese use? Was it a sole striker? Was it 2 up top? How did Dessers play in those positions?
I mean, they for me, it wasn't so much about the formation that mattered. It was more what was more important was more about how the style of play that they had. They were a very, as I said, a high intensity team. They pressed really, really high and really intensely, and some would say somewhat too naively as well. Most of the times they played with a back 3. They did play 3-5-2, 3-4-2-1. I mean, it was very fluid. It was more about the positioning and how to act on the pitch more than anything by Cremonese.
And in terms of Dessers himself, then in terms of his style of play, Rangers have just lost Alfredo Morelos on a free transfer. It's natural, given how big a personality he was at Rangers and his style of play, that he will be Dessers will be likened to him. He feels like a different type of player to me, but
very different.
What's your thoughts on him?
Very, very different. I think Dessers is, I mean, to me, I always saw Morelos as more of a goal scorer, like that was his strength.
Yeah.
Dessers is much more of a football player, if you understand what I mean. He's much more complete and has more skill sets. He's very mobile. He's very dynamic. I actually think you're going to get. I think he's going to do really, really well. I think he's going to be. You're really going to like him, and I think with Lammers as well coming in, I think they're going to, because from what I understand, I mean, you guys play with do you guys play with a sole or 2-man attack?
The last 6 months or so, it's been 2-man, but it's sort of been like a split striker model. So yeah. So the thinking,
I think they can complement each other really, really well, Lammers and Dessers. I really think so. If you play with a 2-man attack.
Yeah, so the Lammers signing, I think, was maybe met with a little bit more skepticism, just because he's not scored a lot of goals at all, really, in the 3 years.
He's not had a very good time in Italy either, if we're perfectly honest. He was brought in, he was signed for 9 million euros by Atalanta, who are known to have a very good eye for talent. And then when he started playing, he started really well. I mean, I think he scored like 1 or 2 goals in early games, but then he just kind of flew off, and he was just, he was sent to Eintracht Frankfurt, he was sent to Empoli and sent to Sampdoria. I think he scored in total in all competitions at club level last season. I think it was just 2 goals.
Yeah.
So he's been quite he's been a disappointment, no doubt.
And it's interesting because obviously he's played as a forward, as a striker throughout his time, but the manager Michael Beale has said when he signed, he sees him as more of a number 10.
Interesting.
Which is interesting. Lammers himself has said he could play there. I know it is just pre-season and we're only going by training videos and clips, which don't tell the full story, but he certainly seems to be one of those players that likes to go on the ball. He's left-footed, which probably excites fans a little bit, and he does seem like he could be more of a creator and more of that second striker that would complement Dessers quite well.
I think that's probably how I would use him as well in that context. Those two together, I think, can do really well together.
Yeah, and again, I guess Sampdoria didn't have a fantastic.
They had a torrid season. It was an absolutely horrific season for them. It's probably the worst season in the club's history. They, off the pitch and on it. as a result of what was going off the pitch, it kind of leaked into on the pitch as well, with an owner who spent large parts of the last season in prison because of financial irregularities. I mean, he was going to. I mean, the negotiations to bring in a coach, Stankovic, at one point were interrupted because the police busted in and arrested him very dramatically.
Yeah.
And so hopefully, now, so they had a horrible season. Everything completely came off at this wheel. The wheels came off last season and came off at the seams. So they, it's a big club. I mean, it's a club that we want to have in the Serie A. The derbies with Genoa, the Derby della Lanterna is, in my opinion, probably if not the most heated, but one of the most heated derbies in all of Italian football. It's one of the most beautiful and spectacular ones, for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting when we talk about Lammers, because that has been a bit of a struggle for him. When he was in Holland, he got a bit more of the ball, as you would think, playing for PSV and Heerenveen, and he would be a little bit better there. I think his season with Heerenveen a few years ago, or 5 years ago, I think now, was one of his most popular. I guess from what you know about those two types of players, do you think moving to a club like Rangers, having more possession, more touches in the final third, more chances, etc., do you feel like that's a good fit for both of them, or is it a better fit for maybe one of them than the other?
I think because Rangers and Celtic, of course, are the two big clubs in Scotland, and every year these two clubs are competing for the title. All teams adapt when they play against these two clubs. I mean, they are the two super clubs in Scotland. So I do think that teams are going to obviously be much more defensive when they play Rangers. I don't think that's going to be a problem for Dessers at all, to be honest. I think he knows how to play with his back against the goal. He knows how to link up. He's a technical player. He's quick. He's fast. He can score from any angles. He's a tricky player. So I don't think he's going to struggle. I think Lammers might struggle centrally if teams decide to shut down that entire kind of passing lanes. Then I think that it's easier, but then it depends. Okay, well, does he go out to the left or the right and try to get involved more there? I mean, that remains to be seen. That's impossible to say. But I think Dessers will not struggle. I actually think this is going to be a really good. I think he's going to be a huge success. I think we're talking about someone who could potentially, in about 12 months' time, we're talking about someone who scored 35 goals for Rangers in the league alone.
I think we were speaking off air, and there's I think Dessers' personality matches a little bit with Rangers. Michael Beale has spoken about adding characters. There's a big amount of work that he's done this season, adding characters who are confident, who can speak well, who have that personality. You mentioned off air, obviously, Dessers has a very good background. He went to law school for a couple of years.
He quit when he was 20 years old. He got his first professional contract, and as a funny thing, from what I understand, having done my research about him, is that he was also a child actor in Belgium in a cop show. He was on a couple of episodes in a TV police drama. That he was an actor on that on there, and no, he's a character. He's an interesting character. He's got a good head on his shoulders. He wants to prove himself. He's very professional in that aspect. I know that he's very professional with what he wants out of his career. He has Nigerian background. He plays for the Nigerian national team. Because he wants to do it at the highest levels, and he wants to play World Cup with Nigeria and so on. He wants to win the AFCON with Nigeria and so on. So
there's definitely from the interviews so far, there's been certainly a bit of ambition about him, and he's
very ambitious, very ambitious
at the top level, which is exactly what we want. The only thing I guess that is maybe a reservation on both of them is, I guess, the size of the fee. Like we were talking off air, Inter have their financial difficulties just now. Rangers have maybe similar in terms of a comparative sense. We can't go out and spend even £10 million on a player. Dessers is a big signing for us in terms of fee. I think it's 4 million or so, plus maybe $1 million or so in add-ons. Obviously the age he is as well. That might be a bit of a challenge given that he's 28. We might not get resale, but to me, he's coming in as a player, a kind of win now player, if you like, who'll come in and, like you said, hopefully get 25-30 goals.
No, it's obvious he's being brought in now to do really well. Like he's not being brought in to do well in a few years. He's brought in now to do well now. Like you said, he's ready now. He's not being brought in to do anything else other than to help Rangers win trophies and titles now.
Yeah, which is what we want. Nima, before we go, I just wanted to get your thoughts on a couple of other Scottish players playing in Serie A. There's a little mini contingency starting over there. Obviously, we have Aaron Hickey, who was there. We've got Lewis Ferguson and Josh Doig. How have they been doing in Italy?
Josh Doig has been really surprising. I thought he was really he did really well for a Hellas Verona side that struggled, but he was one of the best players. Of course, Lewis Ferguson at Empoli was he had a really good he had a good season the season before, but he didn't play as much this season as he did before. And Aaron Hickey was really good before he left, of course.
Yeah. So Lewis Ferguson at Bologna has been linked.
Bologna, yeah.
He was linked with Juventus and Napoli and things like that. Can you see that as being something that is happening, or is that the usual transfer merry-go-round?
No, I don't think he's quite ready for the big clubs in the Serie A just yet.
No.
I think there's quite a bit of there's quite a bit left. Sorry, I got him confused with Liam Henderson at Empoli, who was also Scottish, who was a player his first.
Of course,
season.
Yeah, forgot he was there. Yeah,
he's doing really well. Look, the Scottish players have done really well for themselves in the Serie A, and I think that there's one thing to do well, but to go from a Bologna did really well last season. I mean, they finished in the top 10. Nobody expected them to do that. Thiago Motta did a really good job there. But to go from that and to go to one of the top four, the Inters, the Milans, the Juves, it's a different ball game altogether. And I'm not entirely sure that right now he's ready for that. I think Lewis Ferguson might want to have another complete breakout season for Bologna and really show, really make that starting position his, get a bit more, his stats, not just goals and assists, but also his overall passing and percentages, and as what is required of a midfielder at that level to show his skill set off before reaching that like in order before the Napolis and the Inters and Milans and Juves to be really interested.
Yeah, Lewis Ferguson's an interesting one for Rangers fans. His dad Derek played for Rangers, and then his uncle Barry Ferguson.
Is that his uncle? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, so okay.
He is. We assume he is a Rangers fan. We know he is a Rangers fan. So it's an interesting one because at the time he left, even when he left Hamilton to go to Aberdeen, there was a bit of chat about should Rangers sign him? Should they do this? Should they do that? And then I guess by the time he went and did well at Aberdeen to move to Bologna, possibly Rangers might not have been able to afford the fee that Aberdeen would have made us pay for a player who may not have been a first pick right away. So there's one of those sort of situations where it could be one that got away. So it's an interesting one.
But he's only 23 years old, isn't he?
Yeah.
So, I mean, he's turning 24 in August, if I'm not mistaken, Lewis Ferguson. So, look, he's got the future, to prove himself. And who knows, he might actually make it, come to Rangers. Because from what I understand, isn't he in a Rangers Academy player? Wasn't he a former Rangers Academy
player? He may have been when he was younger. I'm not 100%. I first knew of him when he was at Hamilton, when he was sort of 17, 18. So he may have been. I assume so, given his
background and
that would have been there. But yeah, what do you think of that? I guess that route then. It's if you had to pick something, I don't think I would have thought Scottish players going to Serie A would have been a common thing. Do you think that's maybe just because of the success of Hickey that the Serie A have started to look at this market as a bit more of a value?
Yeah, and it's also because Scotland, I think, are delivering and producing better football players generally. Football is globalized. This notion, this isn't like it was when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, where it was, the top players came from a handful of countries. Football is completely globalized. A world-class player can come from anywhere. I mean, the best left back in the world, if you ask me, is Canadian, Alphonso Davies. I don't think anyone comes close. Who would have thought that a Canadian player would be world class a few years ago? I mean, that's football's not like that anymore. It's a globalized. It's the biggest sport in the world for a reason, and it's a globalized sport. So great football players can come from anywhere, and I think it's interesting. I think Scotland are producing better younger players. Just generally speaking, I think Scottish football is finally experiencing a renaissance, and we see that by qualifying for tournaments as well, which we haven't seen for a generation, if not more. So it's I think it's got to do with that, and also the character of these players. They're all very they come to Italy with the right attitude. They come to Italy with the right attitude of wanting to improve and show what they're good at and improve at what they're not good at and work hard, and commit themselves to learning and improving in every essence. And that's what you can learn. Italy is, in terms of professionalism, in terms of tactical preparation, Italy is still the best league in the world, I think, tactically, in terms of an individual. And also because Italian football doesn't have that much money anymore, they also are incredibly good at developing talent, finding talent, nurturing it, developing it, selling it on. And I think when they look at Scotland, they see, they look, it's not, they look at players who they feel, well, they come here, they learn, they want to improve, and it's just been easy for them to deal with Scottish players. But at the end of the day, if the players aren't of the right quality, then they won't succeed. But we do see, Liam Henderson, Josh Doig, Aaron Hickey, as you mentioned, Ferguson. I mean, these guys have all come and done well at Serie A, every single one of them. I think Josh Doig was one of the better wing backs in all of Serie A last season. He was really, really, people took notice of him, and he was playing again for a bottom of the table side, a Hellas Verona that was very close to being relegated, but he was really one of the standout players there and raised eyebrows.
Yeah, it's again Josh Doig. I thought was very good for Hibs the season before, but one of those ones where the amount of money the cost for Rangers might not have worked out. But yeah, we'll wait and see how they do. But yeah, it's an interesting point. Rangers have obviously had a bit of success with Italian players in the past. We had Rino Gattuso, Marco Negri, Sergio Perini, Lorenzo Amoruso. So
I've interviewed two of those for our podcast, Lorenzo Amoruso and Marco Negri, and they spoke very, highly of their time at Rangers. Yeah, and we also spoke with Mark Haitley as well. We interviewed him as well. Yeah, lovely guy. Yeah. They're all lovely. Marco Negri was one of the funniest people I've ever spoken to in my life. He is hilarious.
Oh, really? I've not spoken to him.
He is very, very funny.
He started at Rangers on fire. I think he got something like 36 goals before Christmas in his first year, and then had some injuries and some off-field issues and things, and never quite got back to it. But Lorenzo Amoruso is probably one of the best defenders Rangers have had in the last 20 years or so. He's very, very highly thought of.
Yeah, and he was very proud of his time at Rangers when I interviewed him, and he was very, very, very happy about that. And I think to some extent he kind of regrets leaving Rangers when he did, I think.
Yeah. If Dessers and Lammers get even close to what Amoruso did for Rangers, I think we'll be on to a winner.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at that point as well, I mean, football was much more different at that time, and Rangers could attract some of the best players in the world back then. Yep. I mean, I remember that. You had Jonas Tern from Sweden, who was a fantastic player. You had Brian Laudrup, Paul Gascoigne, all these fantastic players. Yep. But of course, we're not there anymore.
No, we're not.
Football.
Nima, thank you very much for joining me. Where can people hear more from you?
Thank you so much for inviting me. They can check us out on the Italian Football Podcast on Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Every Monday we do a review show of the last week, and then we do a Q&A pod where our patrons send in their questions, and then of course on Thursdays we do and during the season it's a midweek review, which is also just for patrons. But during the summer transfer window we do transfer deep dives with Italian journalists on location on specific clubs, like with Juve, Inter, Milan, Roma, etc. But yeah, if they want to follow, we have the same handle on all social media. It's at ItaFootPod. And if you want to support us on Patreon, then patreon.com/TIFB.
We will put the links in the show description. It's a very good podcast. Like I said, I'm sure many people will listen already. Goes into a lot of serious subjects, which are great.
Yeah.
But there's also quite a bit of humor about it as well, which I really like.
Thanks. Okay. That's what we try to do, Adam. That's so nice to hear, because that's exactly the kind of mission statement that we have, is that we want to be informative, want to be educational, but also be entertaining and serious.
I definitely think it nails that. So yeah, thank you. And thank you once again for coming on. It's a pleasure.
Pleasure. And good luck for the season.
Thank you, you too.
That was a Heart and Hand production.